I learned that respect was the pillar that held up any relationship. Love, without respect, is just a facade, an illusion that fades with time. I truly understood this on the night Laura, my wife of just 2 weeks, gave me that icy, exasperated stare and said, "If it bothers you so much, find someone else." There was no shouting, no drama, just that one blunt phrase, which landed like a gunshot in the silent room. That night, we were in our apartment on Amber Street, a small place with thin walls and a mediocre view of the city center. Outside, rain lashed against the glass, and inside, the silence between us was nearly unbearable. I was trying, once again, to talk to her about how distant she'd become. Since the wedding, Laura had changed. The spontaneous caresses were gone, as were the knowing smiles that once seemed so natural. There was only a cold apathy. "Laura, I'm not asking for miracles," I said, my voice low, almost pleading. "I just want you to show some interest, to act like we're still a team." She looked at me as if I were speaking another language, sighed with annoyance, and rolled her eyes. "This again, Daniel? Don't you ever get tired of singing the same old song?" Each of her words felt like a whip. I tried to stay calm. "You weren't like this before," I said. With a cynical smile, she replied, Before. How many times are you going to say that word? People change, Daniel. Things aren't like they were before because routine kills everything. I'm bored. You want the truth? I'm sick of this monotony." Her words left me speechless. I stared at her, searching for a crack in that indifferent armor. "Bored of what, Laura?" "Of me?" I asked in a whisper, almost afraid of the answer. She glanced toward the window, as if my question didn't even deserve a reaction. "I don't know," she murmured, the effort of answering seeming to weigh on her. "I just know this doesn't fulfill me anymore." And then she said it. "If it bothers you so much, find someone else." She said it as if she were offering me an easy way out, as if our marriage were a poorly negotiated contract that could be torn up with a single sentence. She didn't blink, didn't hesitate. She said it with confidence, certain I would never dare to do it. I remained silent, studying her face. I wanted to find a sign of regret, a flicker of doubt, but there was nothing, just coldness. Not even anger, because anger at least means that something matters. This was nothing, pure indifference. And that indifference was heavier than any insult. A small, sarcastic laugh escaped my lips, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to do. I nodded slowly. "Good idea," I said. My voice was calm, too calm. She frowned, perhaps unsettled by my reaction, but she didn't press it. She just shrugged and turned back to the television, as if our entire relationship had been reduced to this: two strangers sharing a sofa. In that instant, I knew something inside me had broken for good. I would not be her servant, her life raft, or her unconditional man. If she saw me as disposable, then I would start treating her exactly the same way. And there, in that small, damp apartment, I made my decision, without drama or warning. I would stop holding up a marriage that I was pushing alone. That night, I turned off the lights without another word. I lay down beside her in bed, feeling the rigid line of her back, and thought that maybe this was the beginning of something new, something neither of us was ready to face. I didn't know it then, but her words had not only sealed the fate of our relationship, They had ignited a dangerous calm within me, the kind of stillness you only see in the moments before a storm. The next morning, Laura acted as if nothing had happened. She got up, made coffee, and left for her job at the architecture firm downtown, offering me little more than a half-hearted, "See you later." I didn't answer. I just watched her go, listening to the echo of the door closing behind her. There was no anger left in me, only a new, calculated coldness that felt almost comforting. It was as if I had flipped a switch, deciding not to waste another drop of energy on someone who no longer valued me. That day, I began to change how I existed in the relationship. I stopped sending her messages to ask about her day. I stopped reminding her of appointments or bills she always forgot. No more small kindnesses, no more favors. For years, I had been the one who quietly fixed everything, the one who rescued her when things went wrong. That night, when the power went out because she'd forgotten to pay the bill, I didn't lift a finger. She came home late, tired, and found me sitting in the darkness, reading by the light of my phone. "What happened to the lights?" she asked, irritated. "You didn't pay the bill," I replied without looking up. "Fix it tomorrow." Her silence was heavier than any shout. 2 days later, she was late again. I used to leave dinner waiting for her, but that night I didn't bother. She opened the empty refrigerator and looked at me. "You didn't cook anything?" she asked, in that thoughtless tone she'd adopted. "You can order something, or you can cook for yourself," I said curtly, my eyes still on my phone. There was no argument, just a new, heavy awkwardness that began to settle in the air, like thick smoke in a sealed room. At first, she thought it was a passing tantrum. She would talk to me as if nothing was wrong, making casual comments, even trying to tell me a funny story from her office. I would respond with monosyllables. I didn't yell, didn't complain. I was simply absent, as if we shared a space, but not a life. My calm began to unnerve her more than any fight ever could. One night, around 11, she called me. I was at a bar a few blocks from our apartment. Her voice was annoyed, almost anxious. "Daniel, the car won't start. I'm stuck in the rain. Can you come get me?" Before, I would have run out the door without a second thought. That night, I just sighed. "Can't you call someone else?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. "What?" she asked, incredulous. I repeated the same gift she had given me days earlier. "If it bothers you so much, find someone else." When she got home, she was soaked and furious. She shot me a look that was meant to burn, but she said nothing. Maybe she understood that those were her words first, and now she was tasting her own poison. I said nothing either. No apology, no explanation. I just kept reading, as if she didn't exist. That indifference, I realized then, hurt more than any fight. As the days passed, the tension began to break her. It was no longer me following her, seeking an embrace or a kind word. It was her, watching me with a growing unease, searching for any sign of attention. One evening, she approached me as I watched television. "Do you want to have dinner together?" she asked softly. "No thanks," I replied without looking at her. The next day, "Want to watch a movie?" "I'm busy." Every attempt she made hit an invisible wall, a wall she herself had built. The little things she had always taken for granted began to disappear. No one filled the gas tank when she forgot. No one dealt with the landlord for her. No one kept track of the deadlines she always missed. For the first time in a long time, she had to bear the consequences of her own disinterest. I watched her confidence slowly crumble. One night, I heard her muffled sobs from the bathroom. I said nothing. She came out with red eyes and looked at me, waiting for me to ask what was wrong. I didn't. I walked past her toward the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, as if her sadness were nothing more than background noise. That night, I knew I was winning a silent battle she had never seen coming. That's when her behavior shifted. The disdain and indifference were gone, replaced by nervousness, anxiety, even regret. But I was no longer willing to offer comfort. I had spent too much time being her foundation, her support. Now, I was letting her fall into her own void and watching her try to climb back out, only to find my hand was no longer there to help her, was a strange feeling. Part of me felt avenged. Another part suspected this was only the beginning. The night I found out, the sky was waterlogged with an impending storm. I'd left work late and decided to walk a few extra blocks before heading home. I don't know if it was intuition or just habit, but something pushed me to check her private social media profile, one she rarely used. An old, almost hidden notification caught my eye. An untagged photo, taken at a bar in the San Telmo district. I recognized her red dress, the one she'd only worn once on our honeymoon. The date of the post froze me. It was from 2 weeks after we were married. It wasn't the image that broke me, but the detail that spat the truth in my face. I knew the fool standing next to her, her ex, the same one she had sworn was erased from her life years ago. There they were, his smug smile, his hand on her waist, as if she had never stopped belonging to him. My breathing grew slow, heavy. No more explanations were needed. It was all there, in cursed pixels that seemed to mock me. I said nothing to her that night. I got home and saw her in her pajamas, sitting in front of the television as if nothing in the world was wrong. "You're late. Everything okay?" she asked, feigning normalcy. "Yes," I answered flatly, my eyes fixed on her. Every word she said now sounded hollow. I didn't argue, didn't confront her. I just watched, memorizing every gesture, every movement, as if studying her before bringing it all crashing down. Around midnight, while she slept, I searched for more. Old emails, deleted messages in the cloud, call logs. I didn't have to dig deep. It was all there. Cryptic conversations with him, arrangements for meetings at cheap hotels, messages with tones that barely disguised the obvious, and the dates, all of them recent. It hadn't just happened after we were married. She had done it repeatedly, while I still believed we were building something. The rage didn't come as a shout, but as a sharp, cold thing that pierced me from within. In the dim light of the living room, the screen of my phone reflecting on my face, I poured myself a whiskey, no ice, and lit a cigarette. The smoke filled the air, thick and heavy, almost as heavy as the silence. That dark calm felt familiar, as if I had been preparing for this my entire life. The next morning, I acted as I always did. We had breakfast in silence, she with her coffee, me with my newspaper, like two strangers sharing a space. She watched me from the corner of her eye, trying to read my expression. She found nothing. Is something wrong? She asked cautiously. Nothing, I replied. I smiled, just enough to unnerve her. That smile was my first weapon. Over the next week, I continued my routine without alteration. But something in me had become more methodical, more lethal. I started leaving work late, answering her messages after long delays, disappearing on rainy nights without an explanation. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, that constant sting of suspicion, that uncertainty that eats you from the inside out. One night, as we were drinking in silence in the kitchen, I tossed a question into the air. Did you ever think one of us could ruin everything? She stared at me, motionless, her fingers tight around her glass. What do you mean? She asked. I shrugged. Nothing, just thinking out loud. That sentence left her rattled. I saw it in her eyes. It was the beginning of her fall. In the days that followed, she grew more restless, more attentive. She tried to get closer with small gestures, impromptu dinners, nervous smiles. But by then, I no longer saw my wife. I saw the woman who had driven a knife into my back while I was still taking off my wedding ring from our honeymoon. Every touch from her felt alien, contaminated by the image of her with him in that damned bar. That night, I knew the war had begun. It wouldn't be an emotional outburst. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. No, mine would be a calculated, slow revenge, the kind that leaves no trace until it's far too late. And as I watched her sleep, oblivious to the storm about to break, I understood that indifference was no longer enough. Now, I wanted her to know exactly what she had lost. The night I decided to confront her, the city was submerged in that artificial stillness that only comes after midnight. Outside, the rain was a fine curtain, distorting the neon lights of the neighborhood. Inside the apartment, the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Laura was in the living room, sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine she hadn't touched. She watched me like someone who senses an explosion is coming, but doesn't know which direction the bullet will come from. I poured myself a whiskey, taking my time, and lit a cigarette. The smoke filled the air as I walked to the window and looked down at the wet street. She was the first to break the silence. Daniel, you've been different lately. I feel like you're a million miles away. Her voice trembled slightly, as if she feared the answer. I turned slowly, met her eyes, and let a smirk play on my lips. Miles away? I suppose that's what happens when someone tells you to go find someone else. I saw her swallow hard. She didn't answer. I moved closer, set my glass on the table, and leaned toward her. Tell me something, Laura. Do you remember March 18th? Her face changed. It was just a flicker, but it was enough. That date was tattooed on my memory. 2 weeks after we were married. She opened her mouth to speak, but found no words. What? What about that date? She asked, her voice clumsy with fear. A dry, joyless laugh escaped me. The bar in San Telmo, the red dress, and him. The word hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Laura's face went pale. Her gaze fell, and the glass in her hands began to tremble. Daniel, it's not what you think, she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. I leaned in closer, so close I could feel the frantic rhythm of her breath. It's exactly what I think, I said, my voice low and sharp as a razor's edge. The silence that followed was unbearable. even for her. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. It was a mistake. We were arguing. You were working too much. Each excuse was worse than the last. I cut her off with a wave of my hand. Don't try to justify it. I don't care why. What I want to know is how many times. Her eyes filled with tears. Just that once, she said, but her tone betrayed her. I pulled my phone from my pocket. With a single tap, the screen lit up with the messages, the hotel reservations, the calls. They fell one after another, like dominoes. Just that once? I asked, as she buried her face in her hands. The silence was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I just took a step back, smoke curling from my lips. You know what the worst part is, Laura? That even after all this, you expected me to still be here. You expected the same damn fool who forgave you everything, who always put out your fires. She lifted her head, weeping. Daniel, I love you. Her voice was a broken thread. Love, I repeated with sarcasm. Love isn't sleeping with your ex 2 weeks after you put on the white dress, Laura. Love isn't looking someone in the eye and lying to them while the honeymoon suite still smells of flowers. I walked toward the door, my shadow stretching long across the wall. She shot up from her chair, trying to reach me. We can fix this, please, she begged, grabbing my arm. I stared at her with a glacial calm that was killing her from the inside. No, Laura, I said, pulling my arm free. You broke everything. And now, I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to feel the floor drop out from under you, with no net to catch your fall. I slept on the couch that night. She spent hours locked in the bathroom, crying silently, believing she could wear me down with her tears. But I wasn't the same man. As the clock struck 3 in the morning, I decided her repentance was worthless to me. All that was left was the cold, methodical revenge that would teach her exactly what it meant to lose me. The next morning dawned gray, as if the sky itself knew what was coming. Laura emerged from the bathroom with swollen eyes, wrapped in a robe that seemed to hang from her frame. She looked at me with that mix of fear and hope unique to those who know they're about to lose everything. But I had already made my decision as the dawn painted the blinds a deathly shade. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness. What we had was dead. All that was left was to bury it. I began to move the pieces without her noticing. I called a discreet lawyer, the kind of man who looks like he was born in a damp alley, always with a file at the ready and a cigarette hanging from the corner of his mouth. I want a divorce, I told him. No fanfare, no drama. I want her to sign it before she even understands what's happening. He smiled with the professional calm of a man accustomed to the ruins of others. Give me 2 weeks, he replied. Meanwhile, at home, I gave the performance of a lifetime. I feigned routine, offered small, empty gestures, a rehearsed smile. Confused, she began to cling to hope. She cooked dinners, tried to touch me with trembling hands, looked for any excuse to be close. I allowed it, not because I wanted it, but because I needed her fall to be from the greatest possible height. The more she believed she could win me back, the more brutal the impact would be. I started coming home later from work, leaving her alone in the silent apartment. I'd return smelling of tobacco and whiskey, leaving questions hanging in the air that I never answered. One night, she waited for me with a table set with lit candles. I barely touched my food. I'm tired, I said. Her face crumbled in an instant. This was our new dynamic. I'd give her crumbs of hope, only to snatch them away. One afternoon, without warning, I sent her a message from the office. Not coming home tonight. No explanation. I let her own mind do the dirty work. Let her conjure up invisible lovers. Let her feel the poison of her own actions turning back on her. When I returned the next morning, I found her on the couch, her face a mask of despair. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice a thin thread. I shrugged. "You told me to find someone else, didn't you?" And with that, I walked upstairs without a second glance. Desperation began to gnaw at her. She tried being sweet, compliant. She even left notes stuck to the mirror with phrases like, "We can fix this." I would read them in silence, tear them down without emotion, and drop them in the trash. It was a cruel theater, but a necessary one. I wanted her to feel the void she herself had created. 2 weeks later, the papers arrived. I tucked them into my briefcase, cold and impatient. That night, I invited her out to dinner. She chose an elegant restaurant, as if she could disguise our ruin with soft lights and crystal glasses. We ordered wine, spoke of trivial things, and for the first time in months, I saw a spark of relief in her eyes. She was expecting a truce. In her mind, redemption was still possible. I waited until dessert. I took the envelope from my briefcase and slid it across the table, right between us. Her smile froze. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "The freedom you asked for," I replied without blinking. Her hands trembled as she opened it, the divorce papers gleaming under the dim light. In that instant, her world collapsed. "Daniel," she murmured, her eyes flooding. I leaned toward her, my voice a whisper that cut through the restaurant's murmur. "Laura, when you told me to find someone else, I understood that you no longer saw me as your man. Now, I want you to understand what it's like to lose someone who always believed in you, even when you didn't deserve it." I stood up, left cash on the table, and walked to the door without looking back. As I stepped out into the cold night, I lit a cigarette. Behind me, I could feel her world imploding, but I didn't stop. The rain was beginning to fall again, hitting the pavement with the hollow sound of an inevitable end. For the first time in a long time, I took a deep breath. There was no love, no resentment, only freedom. And in that dark, damp city, I swore I would never look back. The day we signed the divorce, the lawyer's office smelled of dampness and old paper. Laura sat across from me, her hands clasped, her eyes swollen from crying. She could barely hold the pen. "Are you really going to do this?" she asked, her voice like shattered glass. I didn't answer. I just gave a silent nod and signed my name with a firm, steady hand. The scratch of the pen on the paper was the final click of a lock that had been rusting for years. I walked out of that office under a gray sky, lit a cigarette, and wandered aimlessly through the city's wet streets. There was something liberating in the cold air hitting my face, in that atmosphere thick with smoke and asphalt. For the first time in months, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. There were no rings, no promises, no routines to uphold. It was just me, a free man, in a city that seemed to care for nothing and no one. I moved into a small apartment in the old quarter, the kind with cracked walls and views of narrow alleys lit by faint lampposts. The kind of place where no one asks questions and no one expects answers. I found a new job at a night paper, writing up police blotters and crime stories. It wasn't glamorous, but it had something that kept me alive. The long nights, the smoke-filled bars, the sordid tales of a city that never sleeps. While I was rebuilding myself, Laura was sinking. The rumors found their way to me, like inevitable echoes. A mutual friend told me she'd quit her job. Another said she was seen every night at the same cheap bar, drinking too much, searching for something or someone to fill the void I'd left. I felt no pity. It was her turn to stare into the abyss, to understand what it meant to be alone in the concrete jungle. One night, walking home, I saw her. She was on the other side of the street, huddled under an awning, smoking a cigarette as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Her eyes found mine in the gloom. She crossed toward me, her steps unsteady. "Daniel," she said, her voice thick with pleading, "I made a mistake. Not a day goes by that I don't think about what I did. Give me a chance." I looked at her, the smoke from my cigarette drifting between us like a wall. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smeared. She was no longer the confident woman who had told me to find someone else. She was just a broken shadow of her former self. "Laura," I answered calmly, "some mistakes can't be undone. All you can do is learn to live with them." Her eyes filled with tears. "You can't say that. You loved me." I leaned in just enough for her to feel the edge in my words. "I did, and you taught me how to stop." I turned and walked down the street, leaving her in the middle of the rain, trembling between the neon lights and the dark puddles. I didn't hear her follow. I knew she wouldn't. That night, I got home, hung up my soaked coat, and poured myself a whiskey. I turned on the old radio in the kitchen. A slow, melancholic jazz tune was playing, the kind that fills the air with memories that no longer hurt. I looked out the window at the city sprawling before me, with its twisted alleys and lost souls drifting between smoke and light. It was ugly, it was harsh, but it was also freedom. In time, I started to sleep better. I stopped looking for answers in empty places. I learned to live with the constant noise of the city, with the midnight bars and the silent dawns. I let the past rust over in a corner where it could no longer touch me. Laura still called from time to time, always with the same broken plea, but I never answered. I just let the phone ring until it went silent. One morning before dawn, walking down an empty street after putting the last edition of the paper to bed, I stopped under a flickering streetlight and took a deep breath. The city smelled of rain and smoke. A faint smile touched my lips. There were no redemptions, no happy endings, just a new life. One that somehow tasted better in its rawness. And in that moment, I understood. In this city, in this life, there are no second chances. There are only second versions of yourself, and I had chosen mine.